Hi, my name is Mark Ellis, and today I want to take you through the changes from Beta 15 to Beta 16 of X-KeyPad 1.5.1. And the main thing we're going to be talking about again is the Stream Deck support that we're adding to this release. So the thing I want to really cover today is the Stream Deck Plus and the encoders that come with that device, because it's mostly what this beta has got in it. Is Beta 16's got all the encoder support for the Stream Deck Plus. So the SD Plus encoders, they're very similar to the X-Touch Mini encoders, but we have a few extra options on them. First, there are 4 non-concentric encoders, as you can see by this little inset video here. And each encoder does come with a center push button on it, similar to what you see in the on the X-Touch Mini. Although you only have 4, you do have an unlimited number of pages and profiles, like pretty much anything you can with the Stream Deck key. So you can have a really wide number of encoder definitions, way beyond what you'd ever need in a cockpit, and they're pretty easily accessible via the page and profile capabilities on the Stream Deck. I think one unique feature that the Stream Deck Plus has over the X-Touch Mini is over the top of each encoder you have this little LED or LCD panel, and each encoder, each section of the panel above the encoder can handle 200 by 100 pixels, 200 wide by 100 pixels tall, and in there you can put text or images or a combination of images and text. And as you've seen with a lot of the other capabilities within X-KeyPad, that text in those images can dynamically change based upon what's going on inside the simulator. I think one of the biggest advantages of this little panel is that it makes it really easy to see what that encoder is going to do, particularly in a situation where, as you change pages, or as you'll see shortly with something called a multi-encoder, the ability to know what the encoder is currently selected to do really helps out from that standpoint. The X-Touch Mini does not have that. You have to print out a legend that you would put over the top of it, or potentially do something similar, like put a X-KeyPad virtual device on a monitor that you would put behind the X-Touch Mini. So, this Stream Deck Plus is $100 more than the X-Touch Mini. It's about $200 US. But in my opinion, you may find it's really worth it. It's a really nice device and beautifully well built. Okay, so let's go over some of the concepts within the X-KeyPad definition. First off, when you define your encoder, it either could be designed as a single encoder, like what you might find on a mode control panel on a 737, a single encoder for adjusting maybe the heading. But you can also define it as a multi-encoder. As I pointed out, these are all single encoders in here. In other words, they're not dual concentric encoders where you've actually got 2 encoders on one knob, but you can emulate them with an X-KeyPad by using it as a multi-encoder. And what a multi-encoder can have is it can have more than one encoder definition associated with the physical dial here. Typically, you would define this as a dual encoder. Typical use for that in a cockpit is on a radio. You've got the coarse and fine frequency tuning, which is on the inner and outer, concentric knob on the encoder. You find them pretty commonly used in the Garmin 530 for the page and chapter encoder, as well as the frequency changing encoder, on there. But beyond defining just as a dual encoder, X-KeyPad lets you actually put multiple encoders on there. Like you could have 5, 6, 7, 8 encoders all on the one dial. Where you might want to use something like that is, for basically doubling up on an encoder where maybe primarily you use it to change the heading, but with a real quick click you'd like to change it to changing maybe the directional gyro, on the Cessna 172. Maybe you wanted to change the Omni bearing selector on the 172, something where maybe you don't use it all that often, and quickly being able to switch between these encoders lets you be able to do that without having to change pages, on the Stream Deck. So in a multi-encoder, you now have the concept of a short press and a long press. What a short press does is toggle you back and forth between two encoder definitions. And let me show you that over here. I've got the COM1 encoder definition up here. And right now you see as I turn this, what it's going to do is adjust the course setting on COM1. If I give it a quick click, it switches over to changing the fine setting. And you can program it so that if I don't touch it for a while, it'll reset back okay to the primary encoder again. You can see I'm back over on the course setting. But then you can have the concept of a long press, that if I press the dial button down for however long you set it to, I think I've currently got mine set to 250 milliseconds, it'll do some other operation. So I've got this one programmed that when I press it, it'll do the standby flip-flop. Right? So as I press that, it flip-flops between the standby frequency and the active frequency on the radio. So that's the kind of concept of what you can have with these multi-encoders and the concept of a short press and a long press. And you can actually see that the panels are changing here, right? As I come in here and I do this, these are actually two completely encoder definitions. You know, but what you could see is it's being able to display both the fine and the coarse, you know, frequencies on there. So to give you an idea of the kind of thing that you can do with this. Okay, so why don't we get right into how to install Beta 16. There is one extra step I want to walk you through and explain why it's like that, and then we'll go through and see how to, you know, actually configure or what encoder configurations look like, okay? So let's bring X-Plane over here. Actually, before we do that, let me shut down X-Plane to show you how to install this. Okay, so normally when you install the beta updates or any update in X-KeyPad, you basically just take the archive that you get, you unzip it into a temporary folder, and then you copy the entire resulting X-KeyPad folder over to your plugins folder. And although that will work perfectly fine for Beta 16, one of the things that doesn't work with that approach is that any leftover files or directories that you had you know, in the X-KeyPad folder, they remain. They don't get deleted because there's no install program to kind of clean up the things that you're not using anymore. I do want to point out here that in this SD plugin folder, originally I had a folder for OS X and a folder for Windows. And the reason that was like that is I did not know how to actually build a plugin for the Stream Deck where one plugin could actually work for both operating systems. And now that I figured that out, when you install Beta 16, you're going to actually end up with your Stream Deck plugin will actually right be at this SD plugin folder. So this OS X and Windows folder, they're really no longer needed. There's no harm if you forget to delete them, but it's very easy to get confused. If you leave it there, you're going to see a Stream Deck plugin here at this level, and then you're also going to see the old one for Beta 15, you know, at within these operating system folders. And I just don't want you to get confused because to run Beta 16, you have to have the Beta 16 Stream Deck plugin. Otherwise, it'll crash and do horrible stuff. So in the directions, which you're going to see when you go to install Beta 16, it's going to tell you to basically delete this folder. So we're just going to come in here and we're going to delete it and get it out of the way, right? And then you just install this like you normally would. I've already got it, Beta 16 downloaded here in my downloads folder. I'll just unzip that. I go in here and I'm going to grab this X-KeyPad folder, copy it, and come back over to my X-Plane plugins folder and paste it. And we'll let it replace those files. And just to show you what I mean here, if I come into the X-KeyPad folder and I come down to the SD plugins folder, you'll notice that this Stream Deck plugin is now right at this top level. In this plugin file, you can use it to install your plugin in Stream Deck both on the Mac and on Windows. It's basically the same file now that I figured out how to package things properly. Okay, so now that we've got that installed, the first thing we're going to want to do is is uninstall it from here. So if you come down here and I right click, you'll notice that I got beta 15 in. We're going to want to uninstall that. And then all we have to do is come over here and double click this and tell it to install it. And if it worked properly, this now shows 1.5.1 beta 16. So that's what we're going to need. That's what we're going to want to have for beta 16. Okay, now that we've got that working, let's go ahead and fire up X-Plane and take a look at how these configurations look. Okay, so now that we've got X-Plane up and running, let's go ahead and bring up the Stream Deck configurator. And here's one area. So the original generic sample that I gave you guys had no encoder definitions in it. So we're now going to want to bring those in again. And I think what I should be able to do is just, you know, come along here and do a clear. I'm going to clear this out. And then I'm going to do an append. And that's now generic sample definition here does have a number of encoder definitions in it for the COM1, COM2, the nav radios, and a few other things which we'll take a look at. So let's go ahead and bring this in. And once we have this up and go to our definition list, you can see here we have our encoder definitions. And you know, I've done one for the transponder, one for the pilot barometer, COM1, NAV1, NAV2, and you know, COM2 and COM1. Now, the way we associate these, you know, with the particular encoders is, again, it's pretty straightforward. And let me bring it over here and show it to you real quick. Let's try to make this a little smaller. Hopefully we can get both of these on here at the same time. And it's the same concept, right? You're going to come in here. We'll get on page 1. We're just going to drag this X-KeyPad thing here and drop it into the encoder like that. And then you just want to associate it with a function name. So I know that if, let's say I want this one to be COM1, we know that the function name is going to be COM1. So just copy it, do a paste, and bang, we have it in there. And now I could do the same thing like I did before. I can do just do a, you know, copy it, and I can paste it in here like this. And then just edit this real quick because I was kind of consistent with our naming. It's pretty easy, right? Call this nav1. And this one's nav2. I also can do some more on another page. Let's say if we go to this page over here. And by the way, let me just show you. What's really nice about the Stream Deck Plus is you can change pages by just swiping left to right in this panel area. So if I just go like that, that brings me to page 2. So I'll put a couple more on here, like this. And let me come up and we'll grab the transponder. I put that in the wrong place. So I'm just gonna, I think I can just drag that over like that. And we'll put the barrel over here. It didn't really matter where I put it. I just, and there we get the barometer in there. Okay? And just to show you how these work, you know, here I can tune it, you know, and I can get the barometer to whatever I want it to be. And I've got the center button on this one set up so that it's set to standard pressure, 29.92 inches of mercury. All right, we're going to actually look at those definitions. So you can see that associating your encoder definition with the encoders on the Stream Deck Plus, same way you do it with the keys, you know, pretty straightforward. And just show you how you can go back and forth between the pages with a simple swipe like that. Pretty nice. Okay, let's take a look at a simple one here. I think the barometer is probably the easiest one to take a look at. We've actually got that up here right now. Okay, so the barometer one, it's a single encoder. It only does one thing. It doesn't have like an inner and outer ring or anything like that. You know, you simply turn it, and it's going to adjust the baro setting. So you can see here in this definition, I've got just the one primary encoder. And I can come in here and put some comments on that primary encoder if I wanted to. And if I had multiple encoders, I could use this add encoder definition to add like an outer ring and even more if I wanted more. But let's just show you the simple one, okay? So when you get into the primary encoder, you're going to see you have a number of tabs down here. The most important one initially is going to be this dial rotation. And you have two ways of basically operating the dial. One way is that you can associate the dial with a data ref, and that's what I've done in this particular example here. This data ref that I have set here is actually the cockpit 2 gauges, actuator, barometer settings, and inches of mercury. And it happens to be a writable data ref. So by setting it to data ref mode, and I put that data ref in here, I can then operate the encoder in limits mode. And I'm saying that the lower limit of this data ref is 24 inches of mercury. Probably actually could come up a bit. I don't think it ever goes that low. And I set the upper limit to 34 inches of mercury. Same situation, probably higher than you ever would really ever see. And then for each click of the dial, how far do I want to move that data ref? So if I click it to the right, it's going to increase it by 0.01. This gives me the ability to go like 29.91, 0.92, 0.93 with each click of the encoder. And the way these work is, if you go to the left, it's going to end up being a minus that amount. If you go to the right, it's going to be plus that amount. So that's one way that you could see it working okay with a data ref. It's also possible, which we're going to see in a minute, to operate that encoder by using commands. In other words, if I rotate to the right, I can have clockwise commands that I issue, and if I rotate to the left, I'm going to have counterclockwise commands that I can issue. Okay? The next thing you get to choose is the dial press command. So in the case with this one, I don't have the short press concept because it's not a multi-encoder, it's just a single encoder. So when I press the center button on the dial, what do I want it to do? And in my case, I've got this set up, okay, to issue this command, sim instruments barometer underbar 2992, which what this command does is it forces the barometer to standard pressure. Okay? I also can control what the background image is. In my case, I don't have a logic data ref. It's just basically going to always be a blue background, but I could change that if I wanted to. And I could set my lines up. And in my case, what I've done, I've got a line up here that says Barrow. And down here, I have another line, which is effectively a numeric data. And I'm pulling the numeric data from this data ref here, which is the barometer setting in inches of mercury for the pilot. And I'm setting it to a format of 0.2, which says, give me 2 decimal places to the right. You know, if I made that bigger, it would go out longer. Same kind of thing that you can do with the keys, except that they show up here. Now, at the moment, I do have some limitations on what we can show up in here in this little LCD panel above the encoder. At the maximum right now, it can only show 4 lines. I can program that. I could make it 5 or 6, but then the font gets kind of smaller. And if you want it to be more centered, you know, you have to put some blank lines above it and some blank lines, maybe not so much below it, but you have to have blank lines above it. You also don't have any control at the moment over the color. It's going to be a white font, and you don't have any control over the font size. Now, these are things I think I can add. The Stream Deck does seem to have the functionality to allow me to control that a little bit more, but I'm still struggling to figure out, you know, whether I make this for you so it's more raw, where you actually have to put in the JSON format for how to do that, what they call basically a Stream Deck layout, or whether I actually try to put together a rather fancy graphical user interface for you so that you can do it. I'm just not sure how often people are going to want to really tweak this, okay, and you know, change the colors on the lines and have different size fonts. I'll probably add something. I just don't know whether I'm going to, you know, how far I'm going to take it as far as putting the effort into it is concerned. Okay, so that's a simple encoder. Let's go to look at one that's a little bit more complicated. Let's switch over here. And let's go to COM1. And by the way, as long as you got this activity thing turned on here, if you operate the encoder in any way, it'll automatically select the definition for that. Okay, so COM1 is actually set up as a multi-encoder. We have a primary encoder here, which is going to operate the standby coarse frequency, and the secondary encoder is going to operate the standby fine frequency. Now, regardless of which encoder I'm working with at any given point in time, what gets displayed down here is consistent. It's always COM1, the active frequency, and the standby frequency, right? So regardless whether I'm operating the fine controls or the coarse controls, the visual display on the LCD panel stays the same. So that's what this checkbox here does, use primary encoder logic. So all this stuff around the logic data ref, you know, what the command is going to be if I press the center button, the background image, the lines, it doesn't matter whether I'm operating the secondary encoder or the primary encoder. I want to drive everything off of the one primary encoder definition. So you'll notice with this checkbox, if that's checked and I go to secondary encoder, all I get to program is the dial rotation and any comments for that child encoder. I don't have the ability to enter in a different logic data ref and everything else. But if you shut this off, you literally could have every single encoder that you select is going to, could potentially have a completely different display for it being shown. Okay, a couple of other things here. We have this other concept here called a reset time. As I pointed out to you, when I do a short click, it changes the encoder to operate the secondary encoder. If I click it again, it'll go back to the primary. If I have it on the secondary, if this 5-second reset that I've got set up here, after 5 seconds, even though I've got the secondary encoder selected, you know, with that little short press on the dial button, after 5 seconds have gone by with no activity in the encoder, it'll reset back. So it's been more than 5 seconds. If I come and turn it again, you notice I'm back to adjusting the, you know, basically the coarse frequency. Okay? Now let's take a look about how we programmed this. So on the primary encoder, I've chosen to do this with commands. So for the primary encoder, which is the standby coarse, I'm using these commands here. Radio standby COM1 course up, 833, and COM1 course down through 3. So if I turn it clockwise, I get a course up, and if I turn it counterclockwise, I get a course down. Similarly, if you were to look at the secondary encoder definition, same concept, except now I'm using the fine up and the fine down commands. So you saw in two encoders the two different ways that we could do that. One using a data ref, the other with using, you know, commands. And both techniques work. Sometimes you're going to find that, you know, with a, you know, if you've got a writable data ref, sometimes that's the better way to do it, because if you turn these knobs really fast, one of the things the Stream Deck SDK will tell me is it'll tell me how many ticks you turned it, but only give me one message. And if I know how many ticks you turned it, I can actually calculate the changes to the data ref simply by doing some math and jamming in one new value. Doing it with commands, I actually have to queue multiple commands up on a queue, and those commands will get executed each time through the fight loop. So if you have something that, you know, like maybe a heading or something like that, where you want to move it really fast, sometimes you're going to find that doing it with the data ref method may actually, you may find it be a little bit more responsive than doing it with commands, but you can experiment with it and see how it works. Okay, now let's take a look at a little more sophisticated encoder where we've got more than two. So if I come over here and take a look at the transponder encoder, and if I change that, it should select it, okay? Here, the transponder encoder, I've actually got 4 encoders defined. And let me show you how this works. Over here, initially when I start turning this, it's going to change the thousandths digit. If I give it a short click, it now changes the hundreds. Another short click, it's going to change the tens. And another short click, it's going to change the ones, okay? And then again, if I leave it alone after 5 seconds on the reset time, it'll go back to the primary digit again, which I think it's been 5 seconds. Yes, it has. And what the long press does is it's going to ident the transponder. That's the way I have it set up. So very similar to what we did with the comm radios. The only difference is I now have 4 encoders rather than just the 2. So let's take a look at the same concept here. By dial rotation, on the primary, it's move the transponder up thousandths up by 1 or down by 1. whether it's a clockwise or a counterclockwise command. And again, because the display does not change regardless of whether I'm operating the thousands digits, the hundreds digits, or whatever, I've got this checkbox set here saying just use the primary encoder's logic. So I come in a secondary coder, you're going to see that we're doing the hundreds up and down. In encoder 3, we're doing the tens up and down. And in encoder 4, we're doing the ones up and down. So you can see how you can configure an encoder to do more than just one or two things, right? You can go on. I mean, obviously at some point you're going to run out of tabs here, but I mean, I think you could easily put a 10 or 12 encoder definitions on one multi-encoder if you wanted to do so. All right, let's come back to the primary encoder and let's take a look at what's driving the display. So the logic data ref I'm using is the transponder ID, which effectively tells me whether or not the transponder is identing or not. Okay, so in other words, if I put this into ident mode, you'll notice that this value of this data ref goes to a 1, and when it comes out of ident mode, it'll go back to a 0. So I'm going to use that to drive some things. It's not going to drive the dial press at all. You notice that I've got this set here to always true because it's sort of irrelevant. Whatever the logic data ref is, it doesn't matter. Anytime I long press on that button, I want to just ident the transponder, which is what this command does. Sim radios transponder underbar ident basically is the same thing as pressing the ident button on the transponder in the 3D cockpit. Now in the background image, I do have two different images. These are just basically PNG files, one all red, one all blue. I probably could get a little more sophisticated than that, but I was in a rush. And they've got these logics on here, right? So in the case where that ident data ref is a 1, indicating that it's identing, I want the background to be red. And in the case where it happens to be not identing, I want it to be a background of blue. Same thing you did, with the, with the keys. And the lines are the same way, right? In the case where I'm not identing, I want to say transponder code, and down here I'm actually doing a numeric data line segment where I'm actually pulling out the information out of the transponder code data ref and telling it I want it to be 4 digits with no decimal places because it's an integer, it has no decimal places. But however, when it's identing, which is when this condition happens to equal a 1, all I want to display on there is ident. And you'll notice I put the blank line up here to get this down a little bit. So I think you get the gist of the way these encoders work. It's quite powerful. I think with the fact that you can flip these pages so easily here with this thing, with just simply sliding it back and forth like this, and the fact that you can add a lot of different encoder definitions to one multi-encoder definition, you can get a lot of functionality out of this one hardware device. I mean, the two of them together, a Stream Deck Plus and a Stream Deck XL, is really, a nice combination. Or maybe a Stream Deck Plus and a virtual device, a virtual device just on a monitor, touch monitor, whatever. So I think you get a sense of how this all works. It's pretty new code. I think I tested it pretty thoroughly, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised if you run into a bug or two. Please let me know if you find anything. And I think the next step's going to be is I am going to look into giving you a little more control over changing the text in this little panel here. I'd like to be able to have you so that you can control the font size a little bit more and possibly choose whether you want it rather than being center aligned, it could be left or right justified, and be able to control the color on a line-by-line basis. Just got to see, how much control I'm going to give you over that and how difficult it might be for you to be able to do it. Okay, thank you very much for watching this, and I hope you enjoy it, and please provide your feedback in the forum on xplain.org.